Marjorie Stannard ate a single bowl of canned tomato soup at the small oak table in the kitchen of her one-bedroom apartment on Birch Street in Coppershade, Iowa, on Valentine's Day, 2026, and she did not cry because she had used up all her February crying the previous Tuesday when the postman had handed her a heart-shaped card forwarded from her old address in Hopkins County. Addressed in her late husband's left-handed slant, post-dated by mistake to 2026 by a stationery store that had sat on his order for 2 years and had only mailed it out the week after Tom died. She had set the card on the windowsill above the sink, and she had wept into the bowl of soup she was making for her supper, and she had decided that one good cry was the most a 71-year-old widow ought to allow herself in any given week, because there were many more weeks coming and a person had to ration. Now, 2 days after that one good cry, Margie sat across from the empty chair where Tom had eaten 10,000 suppers in their old kitchen on Hopkins Road, and she lifted spoonfuls of the same brand of soup he had bought every other Wednesday since 1981. The kitchen of the rental apartment was small and cream-walled, with a vintage white enameled gas stove she did not entirely trust, and a single pendant lamp that swung if a truck went past the corner. On the wall, above the table, side by side in matching black wooden frames, hung the 2 photographs that ran her household. A 2003 portrait of her son Daniel in his Marine Corps dress blues, 18 years old, taken 3 weeks before his deployment to Iraq, where he had been killed by a roadside device near Fallujah in November of 2004 at age 24, and a 1978 wedding photograph of herself, 23 years old in a borrowed lace dress, and Tom Stannard, 26, with a hopeful eyebrow, and the dark blonde hair he had kept all the way to his last day in August of 2024. On the high shelf above the photographs sat a small white china urn with a votive candle in front of it. Margie had not yet decided where Tom belonged. She had thought in the long November after he died that she would scatter him on the riverbank where they had picnicked in 1979. She had thought, in December, that she would split him between the riverbank and the small plot beside Daniel in the cemetery on the south side of town. She had thought, in January, that she might just keep him on the high shelf for 1 more year and see what felt right when spring came. The candle had been lit and unlit so often that the wax ran in long, uneven streaks down its sides. Margie was 71 years old. She had been a widow for 1 year, 5 months, and 12 days. She had been a mother who had outlived her child for 21 years and 3 months. She had been the daughter of Walter Whitlock for 17 years before the morning her mother woke her, on the 3rd of August, 1972, and told her that her father had dropped dead of a heart attack at his counter at the Five and Dime 2 days before, on the morning of August 1st, before the store opened. Eleanor Whitlock had not let Margie go to the funeral parlor. Eleanor had said it was no kind of sight for a young girl, and Eleanor had buried Walt at the Coppershade Methodist Cemetery on a Friday afternoon, while Margie was at the Tucker farm, helping Patricia, Margie's older sister, with her newborn son. Eleanor had sold the Five and Dime within the month for $14,000 to a Cedar Rapids man who turned it into a gift shop by Thanksgiving. Eleanor had moved Margie and herself to a small apartment on the other side of town, and she had never spoken Walt's name again. Not at any Christmas, not at any wedding, not at Margie's own wedding in 1978, when Margie had walked down the aisle alone because her mother had refused to give her away in a Methodist church. Margie had asked her mother once, in 1991, when Eleanor was in the early stages of the dementia that would finally take her in 2003, what her father had died of. Eleanor had looked at her with the unfocused stare of a woman beginning to lose the country of her own life, and she had said, "He died of being weak, Margie. Don't ask me again." Margie had not asked again. She finished the soup. She rinsed the bowl in the porcelain sink. She wiped her hands on the dish towel embroidered with bluebirds that her sister Patricia had sent her from Florida for Christmas. She walked into the small bedroom, and she pulled on her cream cable-knit fisherman's sweater over her undershirt, and she tucked it into her old khaki canvas trousers, and she sat on the side of the iron bed, and she laced up her brown leather Oxfords the way her father had taught her in 1961, one over and under, never a knot at the top. She wrapped a heather gray knit watch cap low over her ears. She buttoned her navy barn coat. She slung the oatmeal canvas messenger bag across her shoulder. She tucked her small silver locket inside her sweater so it would not catch on the zipper. She had a walking loop. 2 blocks down Birch Street to Main, 4 blocks west along Main to the bridge at Sycamore Creek, 4 blocks back, 2 blocks home. 45 minutes at her pace. She did it every afternoon between 2 and 3 o'clock because she had read in a magazine at the doctor's office that widows who did not get out of their apartments every single day went down faster, and Margie had not survived 21 years of bedrock grief over Daniel to be killed in 2 years by the easy quiet of canned soup and a couch. The afternoon was bright and very cold. The temperature had dropped to 14 degrees overnight, and the wind off the creek was the wind off the creek, which was to say, it cut through wool. The sidewalks of Coppershade, Iowa, population 1,842 as of the last census, had been salted poorly. Margie walked carefully, hands deep in her coat pockets, breathing through her scarf so the cold did not seize her lungs. She passed the Methodist church where she had been baptized in 1955. She passed the post office where Tom had picked up their mail every Saturday for 46 years. She passed the bakery where her sister Patricia used to buy the white frosted Long Johns Margie loved as a girl. She passed Main and Elm. She turned the corner and she stopped, because she had stopped at this corner every afternoon for 1 year and 4 months without letting herself look across the street, and today, for some reason she could not name. The wind shifted, and her head turned of its own slow accord, and she let herself look. The 5 and Dime sat on the opposite sidewalk 1 block down. It had sat there since her grandfather Whitlock built the brick shell in 1949 with the loan from his cousin in Des Moines. It had sat there during her childhood when she had ridden her bicycle down to count her birthday quarters at the candy counter on Saturday mornings. It had sat there when her father had walked her in by the hand at age 4 to show her how the cash register made its bell sound. It had sat there shuttered since the dollar store tenant gave up the lease in 2018. The plywood on the front windows had gone gray. The gold leaf signage above, Whitlock's 5 and 10, was still legible because old gold leaf signage did not go entirely away, no matter how many tenants painted over it. A yellowed paper notice was taped to the plywood at eye height. Margie crossed the street without looking for traffic. She stepped up onto the sidewalk in front of the boarded windows. She read the notice. Public auction. Property known as 412 Main Street, Coppershade, Iowa. Reclaimed by Coppershade. County for unpaid property tax. Building and contents in place included. Reserve price, $1. Back tax settlement, $1,847. Bid day, Friday, March 6th, 9 a.m., Coppershade County Courthouse. Contact Clerk Adelaide Cornish, Extension 4. Margie read the notice 3 times. The wind came up off the creek and rattled the plywood in its nails. The bare oak branches above the entry creaked the way they had creaked in 1962 when her father had hoisted her up to pull a paper Christmas star off a top branch. A small voice in Margie that had been silent for 54 years said, very quietly, "Walt is still in there." She did not know what she meant by that. She did not understand it. She stood at the boarded window in the iron February cold with her gloved hand pressed flat against the cold plywood, and she felt the old shape of the storefront under the wood, the way a blind person feels a face, and she said aloud, to the empty Main Street and to the empty plywood and to the empty 54 years, "Daddy, I'm here." She walked the rest of her loop. She did not feel the cold on the way home. That night, at her kitchen table, she counted out the contents of her cookie tin savings, which she kept on the top shelf of the cupboard above the refrigerator. Tom's life insurance had paid her $78,000 in October of 2024. She had banked 74 of it. The remaining 4 she kept in 20s in the tin. She had $1,847 in back taxes to pay if she bid. She had $1 to make the bid itself. She had 3 weeks to decide. She did not need 3 weeks. She decided that night. She told no one. She did not tell her sister Patricia in Florida because Patricia, who was 75, and who had not spent more than 14 days in Iowa in the last 40 years, would have called her irresponsible. She did not tell her cousin Lila in Des Moines, because Lila would have called her insane. She did not tell the Methodist minister, because she had stopped attending Methodist services in 1972 and had never quite found her way back to a pew. The morning of Friday, March 6th, was clear and very cold. Margie walked to the courthouse in her good coat at 8:45, with the $1,847 in back taxes folded into a plain manila envelope inside her messenger bag, plus one single-dollar bill in the inner zipped pocket she had carried it in since she had decided. The courthouse was a small Romanesque red sandstone building from 1894, with broad steps and a brass dome and a memorial plaque to the Coppershade County war dead from 4 American wars on which Daniel Stannard's name appeared in the final column on the right. Margie touched her son's name with her gloved finger the way she had touched it every time she had climbed those steps for 21 years, and she went inside. The clerk's office was on the first floor at the end of the marble hallway. Adelaide Cornish, who went by Addie, was 54, with a soft, round face and the kind of pageboy haircut Coppershade women had been wearing since 1962. Addie's grandmother had bought peppermint sticks at Margie's father's counter in the 1950s. Addie looked up from her desk when the bell over the door rang, and her face changed. "Mrs. Stannard," Addie said softly. "Mrs. Stannard, you are bidding on the 5 and dime." "I am," Margie said. Addie did not ask why. Addie had grown up in this town, and Addie knew that 54 years was a long time to walk past a window and not look at it, and Addie was not the kind of clerk who pressed for an explanation when the answer was already standing in front of her in a quilted navy barn coat. She pulled a green folder from her drawer. She handed Margie the bidder application form. Margie removed her gloves. She filled in her name in the schoolteacher cursive she had practiced since 1962. Marjorie Whitlock Stannard. She filled in her Birch Street apartment as her current address. She wrote, in the line for previous family interest in the property, "My father, Walter Whitlock, operated the store from 1949 to 1972. Addie looked at the line and looked at Margie and pressed her lips together and stamped the form with the heavy iron stamp. Received March 6, 2026. The bidding opened at 9 on the dot in the small wood-paneled hearing room on the second floor. Margie sat in the second row. Across the aisle from her sat a man in a wool overcoat from Des Moines named Hartwell, who Addie had warned her was here to bid on the lot for a coffee franchise that wanted to tear the building down for a drive-through. Hartwell was bright-eyed and 40 and impatient. He had a folder. He had a phone. He had a ring on his right hand that flashed when he typed. Addie banged the small wooden gavel her father had carved her in 1990 and said, "Bidding opens at $1 reserve, plus back tax settlement of $1,847 on the property at 412 Main Street, Coppershade. Mr. Hartwell." Hartwell said, $300. Margie stood up. She had not known she was going to stand up. She had thought she would sit and lift her hand. But she stood, in her cream sweater and her navy barn coat and her good wool trousers. And she said, in a voice she had not heard from her own throat in 20 years, $500. Hartwell said, $600. Margie said, $800. Hartwell looked at her over his folder. He took her in. He took in the silver locket and the canvas messenger bag and the pewter curls and the soft brown eyes that had outlived a Marine and a husband and a father. And he hesitated very slightly the way men in wool overcoats from Des Moines hesitate when they realize they are bidding against something they did not budget for. He said, $1,000. Margie said, $1,200. Hartwell put down his folder. He closed his phone. He sat back in his chair. He looked at Addie. He said, "No further bid, ma'am." Addie banged the gavel. Sold. The property at 412. Main Street, Coppershade, to Marjorie Whitlock Stannard for the sum of $1,200 plus back. Tax settlement of $1,847. It was over by 9/11. Margie sat down. She put her hands flat on her knees, and she breathed the way the cardiologist had taught Tom to breathe in 2023 when his heart had begun to skip on him. In and hold. Out and hold. She did this 6 times. Then she stood up, and she walked down to Addie's office, and she wrote out a check for $3,047 from the account where Tom's life insurance lived. And she handed it across the counter, and Addie handed her a single iron key on a brass key ring with a small paper tag that read 412. Main. Front door only. Back door. Deadbolt internal. Addie said softly, "Mrs. Stannard, do you want company?" Margie said, "Addie, I would like to do this alone the first time." Addie said, "Yes, ma'am." Margie left the courthouse at 9:45. She walked the 4 blocks to 412 Main Street with the iron key warm in her gloved fist. The March sky had clouded over. A fine cold drizzle had begun. Bare branches dripped over the sidewalk. The town smelled of wet brick and wood smoke from the bakery's stove. She stood for a long time on the sidewalk in front of the boarded plywood. She took the iron key from her glove. She fitted into the deadbolt of the recessed entry door. She turned it. The bolt slid back with the heavy iron sound of a lock that had not been worked in 3 years and did not particularly want to be worked now, but consented because she had asked it nicely. The door opened toward her with a long, slow, groaning sigh, and the air that met her was the air of a building that had been holding its breath for 8 years. She stepped inside. The smell that hit her first was a layered smell. Mouse droppings on the topmost layer, the way mouse droppings sit on top of all old American interiors. Beneath that, plaster dust and old varnish. Beneath that, something more particular and more old, something that took Margie 3 full seconds to place and that, when she placed it, made her hand rise involuntarily to cover her mouth. It was the very faintest ghost of the kerosene oil her father had used to wipe down the wooden counters at closing every Saturday night in 1969, when she was 14 and had helped him close on alternating weekends. The oil had soaked into the maple boards of the counter for 23 years of his ownership, and it had outlasted 4 tenant turnovers, and it was still there, beneath the dust and the mouse droppings and the new varnish, the faintest oily warmth of her father's hand at the long maple counter on a Saturday night. Margie stood in the doorway with her hand over her mouth. She did not cry. She had used up her cry budget for the week. She let the smell move past her and into her sweater and into her hair and into the wool of her coat, the way wood smoke moves into the wool of a coat when you stand near a campfire. And she felt, for the first time in 54 years, that her father was inside this room with her, and that he had been inside this room waiting. She closed the door behind her. The interior was a long, narrow rectangle, 20 feet wide by 60 feet deep, with pressed tin ceilings still intact overhead, and wide plank wooden floors discolored in a patchwork of stain rings from where the 4 tenants had each installed and removed their own different fixtures. Peeling layers of paint jeweled on the walls, pale teal under salmon pink under beige under cream. A glass display counter had been shoved off-center toward the front window. A 1990s chrome clothing rack lay tipped on its side in the middle aisle. A 1980s plastic vending machine, empty, sat by the back door with its door hanging open. A scattered tangle of wire shelves leaned against the side wall. Margie walked down the long aisle slowly with one gloved hand trailing the chrome rack and the plastic vending machine and the wire shelving, the way a person walks the rim of a familiar bathtub in the dark, navigating by old memory and outline. At the back of the shop, against the rear wall where she remembered her father's office door had been, she stopped. The office door was gone. It had been taken off its hinges by the 3rd tenant, and the doorway was now an open arch into the small back room. The back room had been her father's office. It had a small desk where he kept his ledger and a small wood stove she had loved as a girl, because he had let her open the door of it with the iron poker when he was banking the coals at the end of the day. The wood stove was still there. It sat in the back left corner of the small room, dusty, undisturbed. None of the 4 tenants had ever moved it, because moving a cast-iron stove cost more than tenants had been willing to pay. Margie walked into the back room. She set her gloved palm flat on the cold, cast-iron flank of her father's wood stove. She said, very softly, "Hello, Daddy." In the corner, behind the stove, half hidden in shadow leaning against the back wall, was a long, deep wooden tray. She had not seen it in 54 years, and she knew exactly what it was. It was the penny-sorting tray her grandfather Whitlock had hand-built from quarter-sawn oak in 1949, when he opened the 5 and dime, the deep rectangular tray with 12 square compartments divided 3 across and 4 down, each lined in forest green felt. Her father had used it for 50 cents and dimes and pennies and nickels at the candy counter on Saturday mornings, and Margie had played in the empty compartments with her tiny 3-year-old fingers in the summer of 1958, and her grandfather had let her keep one shiny new penny from the corner compartment to take home in her overall pocket. The tray had a small brass plaque nailed to the front edge, Whitlock's 5 and 10, 1949. Margie remembered the plaque the way some women remembered their mother's handwriting. She knelt down on the dusty wood floor beside the wood stove. Her 71-year-old knees protested, but they held. She reached behind the stove with both hands, and she lifted the tray out from where it had been leaning, and the wood was heavier than she remembered because the wood was heavy with 77 years, and the felt in the compartments was darkened almost to black with copper penny patina from the thousands and thousands of pennies her father had sorted in his life. And the green of the felt was the green Margie had not let herself remember since 1972. She carried the tray back into the main room. She set it on the long maple counter at the front of the shop. The maple of the counter had the kerosene oil smell coming up out of it where her palms touched it, and Margie pressed both her palms flat against the wood for a moment and let the warmth of the wood come up through her gloves before she pulled her gloves off and laid them aside. She wiped the tray clean with the sleeve of her sweater. Dust came up in a soft, pale ghost and drifted toward the front window. The brass plaque, polished by her sleeve, came up bright. Whitlock's 5 and 10, 1949. She stood at the counter with the tray in front of her, and she ran her fingertip along the inside seam of the top edge of the wood, looking for nothing in particular, the way a woman runs her finger along the edge of a casket lid at a funeral parlor when she does not know what else to do with her hand. Her fingertip caught on a tiny half-millimeter seam in the wood at the bottom of one compartment in the upper right corner. She pressed it. It gave. The fingertip-sized lip of wood lifted slightly. A false bottom. Margie's heart began to do the slow, heavy work that hearts do when they remember they are not yet finished. She looked around the empty store for an ivory letter knife or a kitchen butter knife, anything thin enough to pry up the panel without splitting the wood. In the back of the small office, on the windowsill, sat a small ivory butter knife that one of the 4 tenants had left behind, the kind that came with a 1960s wedding gift cutlery set. Margie went and got it. She slid the ivory butter knife under the lip in the corner. She lifted slowly with the patience of a woman who had assembled 1,000 cross-stitch frames in her life. The false bottom panel rose with a soft, dry, papery creak. It was a single thin sheet of oak veneer cut to the inside dimensions of the tray, and it had been lifting up and down on a small leather hinge at the back edge for 77 years, and it lifted now. Beneath the panel, resting on a yellowed bed of folded newsprint dated July 17, 1972, was a folded packet of cream stationery tied with a length of plain butcher's twine. Margie's hands began to shake. She set the ivory knife down. She lifted the packet out with both hands slowly, the way a person lifts a sleeping newborn out of a bassinet. The packet was about half an inch thick. It weighed almost nothing. She turned it gently in her shaking hands and read the writing on the top page. In her father's careful slanted fountain pen ink, in the careful blue-black he had ordered from the Schaefer catalog every Christmas for 23 years, were 6 words. "My Margie, when you are old enough." She sat down. There was a wooden chair beside the maple counter, an old captain's chair with a split cane seat that some tenant had left, and that her father had not, in fact, owned. But it held her weight when she lowered herself into it, and she sat with the cream packet in her lap, and she stared at the 6 words written in her father's hand for what might have been 3 minutes, and might have been 20. The cold, March light through the boarded plywood was the cold March light. The drizzle on the roof was the drizzle on the roof. A truck went past on Main Street, and Margie did not hear it. She untied the butcher's twine with shaking fingers. She unfolded the packet. 9 pages of cream stationery. The top page, dated in the upper right corner, July 14th, 1972. The careful, slanted writing schoolteacher neat. She did not read them at the counter. She refolded the packet. She retied the twine. She put the packet inside her oatmeal canvas messenger bag in the inner zipped pocket where she had carried the single-dollar bill that morning. She zipped the pocket. She picked up the penny tray. She tucked it under her right arm. She picked up her ivory butter knife. She walked back through the long aisle and out the front door, and she locked the deadbolt with the iron key, and she walked the 4 blocks home to her apartment on Birch Street in the cold March drizzle, with the penny tray tucked against her ribs and the 9 pages folded against her hip in the inner pocket of her messenger bag. And she did not pass a single soul on the sidewalk. And she did not need to, because she was not alone. She was carrying her father home. In her kitchen on Birch Street at 4 o'clock in the afternoon of Friday, March 6, 2026, Margie set the penny tray on the small oak table covered with the white lace tablecloth. She put on water for tea. She lit the candle in front of the white china urn on the high shelf. She took down her half-moon tortoiseshell reading glasses from the top of the refrigerator and slid them onto her nose. She set the cream packet beside the penny tray. She untied the butcher's twine again. She unfolded the 9 pages and laid them out on the lace tablecloth in 2 rows of 4, with the 9th page set above the first like a heading. She poured the tea. She sat. She lifted page 1 and she read her father's letter aloud in the quiet of her apartment, in the slow voice of a woman who had been waiting for this letter for 54 years and who had every intention of letting every word take the full breath it asked for. "My dearest girl," the letter began, "I am writing this in my office in the back of the store on a Friday afternoon in July, with the door closed and the bell off the front door, so I will hear you if you come in, although you are at Patricia's this week and will not. Your mother does not know I am writing this. Your mother does not know what I am going to write. Your mother does not know that I went to Dr. Levin at Mercy in Cedar Rapids on the 7th of May, and that he told me, very gently, that the pain I had been ignoring since Christmas was a tumor in the lining of my stomach the size of a small lemon, and that he gave me 8 weeks to live, and that I would be lucky to see Labor Day. I am writing this on the 7th week." Margie set page 1 down. She did not pick up page 2 for a long time. Her tea cooled. The candle in front of Tom's urn flickered. She removed her reading glasses with one trembling hand, and she wiped her eyes very slowly with the corner of the lace tablecloth. And she put her glasses back on, and she lifted page 2. "I have not told your mother," the letter continued, "because Eleanor is not a woman who can carry a thing like this without breaking it, and I want my last weeks to be quiet in our house. I have told Pastor Vance at Bethel Methodist, who will be the one to perform my service when the time comes. I have told my brother Henry in Davenport. I have told the man at Coppershade Funeral Home, Mr. Vale, who has been a friend since 1947, and who has promised me he will tell your mother that I died of a sudden heart attack at the store on the morning of the day I die, however that day comes, so that she will believe what she needs to believe and will not have to face the 8 weeks of knowing she did not know. I'm asking the same kindness of you, my daughter. Until you are old enough to read this letter and old enough to forgive me, I want you to believe what your mother believes, because it will be easier on you. The truth has waited 50 years already in our family. It can wait a little longer. I am writing 9 pages, the letter said, because I have 9 things to tell you, and because I will not be allowed 9 more conversations." Margie set page 2 down. She turned to page 3. The 3rd page told her about the coffee can. "There is a Hills Brothers coffee can," the letter said, "buried 2 feet under the north corner of the old peach tree in the back garden of our house on Sycamore Avenue. Inside the coffee can are $2,400 in $10 bills, Every dollar I have saved out of my margin at the counter since you were born. I'd wanted to give it to you for college. But your mother believes a girl with a high school education and a husband does not need college, and she would have spent it on a Buick if she had known it existed. The coffee can is yours. The house is now Eleanor's, and I suspect she will sell it after I'm gone. You will need to go dig the can up before she sells the house, my Margie. Take a flat shovel, go at twilight. The peach tree is the only peach tree in the row. Margie remembered as she read this that her mother had, indeed, sold the house on Sycamore Avenue in October of 1972, 2 months after Walt's death, to a young dentist named Garrison, who had raised the old peach orchard the following spring to put in a swimming pool for his children. Margie had stood at the curb at age 18 and watched the peach trees being uprooted with a hydraulic claw. She had not been told there was anything to dig up. The dentist's children had grown up swimming in the spot where her father had buried $2,400 under the north corner of the peach tree. The 4th page of the letter said, very gently, that her father knew there was a chance the coffee can would never be recovered, and that he had taken precautions. The precaution was the safety deposit box. I have opened a safety deposit box at First National of Coppershade, page 4 said, on July 10th of this year, in your name only, Margie. Box number 212, north wall of the vault, far right corner. The clerk who set up the box is Howard Pinney, who was in my Sunday school class in 1928 and who has known me since I was a boy. Howard has agreed to keep the box in your name with no fee, no annual rent, indefinitely. The bank is required by Iowa law to release the contents of the box to you upon your request and presentation of identification proving you are Marjorie Whitlock, born March 11, 1955. Howard knows your face. Howard knows my handwriting. Howard will help you. I have placed 4 items in the box. The 5th page of the letter named them. My father's pocket watch, which my mother gave me on the day of my own father's funeral in 1924, and which has kept time for 102 years. My father's tin sheriff's deputy star, which he wore as a Coppershade County deputy from 1898 to 1924. A sealed envelope of $2,400 in $10 bills, which is a duplicate of the coffee can, because I would not let your inheritance depend on a single hiding place. And a small framed photograph of myself, my first wife Vivian, and my first daughter Helen, taken May 12, 1947 in Cedar Rapids, Iowa, on the steps of St. Patrick's Catholic Church on the day of our wedding. Margie set page 5 down with a hand that did not yet know it was shaking. Page 6 began with the words, "Yes, my dearest girl. You have a sister. She is 6 years older than you," the letter said. Her name is Helen Margaret Whitlock. She was born July 22, 1947, 3 months after Vivian and I were married. Vivian was the love of my early life. We met at the orphanage in Davenport where she had been raised when I was 21 and she was 19 and I was delivering a load of corn from my father's farm. Vivian died of complications from rheumatic fever on the 11th of March, 1953, when Helen was 6 years old. I was 28, and I was a widower with a small daughter, and I was working 12-hour days at the Five and Dime your grandfather had opened in 1949. The 7th page told the rest. I met your mother, the letter said, in the spring of 1954. Eleanor was 25 and beautiful and well-spoken, and she had a small inheritance from her father's hardware company in Iowa City, and she wanted to be a wife. She did not want to be a stepmother. She told me in our second courtship conversation that she would marry me only on the condition that Helen be sent to live with my brother Henry in Davenport, and that the 2 of us start fresh. I told her no, 3 times. The 4th time she walked away from me at the soda fountain at Whitlock's, in this very store, and she got on a Greyhound and she went to Iowa City and she did not come back for 2 months. And I, my dearest girl, was a tired widower of 29 with a 6-year-old daughter and the Five and Dime to keep open, and I did the worst thing I have ever done in my life. I sent Helen to my brother Henry in Davenport. Henry and his wife Ruth raised her as their own. They told her, very gently when she was old enough to ask, that her mother had died, and that her father had remarried, and that her stepmother had not wanted children of her father's previous life in her household. They told her the truth because Henry was an honest man. I have not seen Helen since she was 6 years old. Eleanor forbade contact, and I, weak as I was, allowed her to forbid it. I wrote a letter once a year in care of Henry, on Helen's birthday, every July 22nd from 1953 to this year, and I do not know if Henry passed those letters along or kept them in a drawer. I have not stopped writing them. I will write the next one on July 22nd of this year if I am still alive. I doubt I will be. I am writing this letter to you, my dearest second daughter, because I have failed your sister and because I will not fail you. You have a right to know that she exists. Henry's address in Davenport is on page 9. If Henry is gone by the time you read this, his son Carl will know where Helen is. Helen will be at least 18 years old when you are old enough to find her. She may be 60. She may be 80. Find her if you can, Margie. Tell her that her father loved her until his last breath, and that I was a coward. The 8th page was prayer. The 9th page was Henry's address in Davenport and a list of Walt's pallbearer wishes and one final paragraph. My dearest girl, I have loved being your father for 17 years, and I will love being your father wherever I go after this. I am sorry I will not see you grow up. I'm sorry I will not give you away. I'm sorry I will not meet the man you will marry. Be kind to your mother, even when she is hard on you, because she has been hard on herself for 30 years, and she does not know how to stop. Be kind to your sister Helen when you find her, because she has been waiting for you. And be kind to yourself, my Margie. You are the best thing I have ever done. The letter ended with his signature and the date. Walter J. Whitlock. July 14th, 1972. Margie sat at her kitchen table in Coppershade, Iowa, on the evening of Friday, March the 6th, 2026, with the 9 pages laid out across the lace tablecloth, and the tea cold in her cup, and the candle in front of Tom's urn burned down to a stub, and the cold March drizzle still falling outside her window, and she did not cry. She had used up her cry budget for the week. She would use up next week's tomorrow. She refolded the pages. She tied them with the butcher's twine. She kissed the top of the packet. She put the packet inside the inner pocket of her messenger bag for the second time that day. She slept for 10 hours that night, the first 10-hour sleep she had had since Tom died. On Monday morning, March 9th at 9 sharp, Margie walked 4 blocks down Main Street to the building that had been First National of Coppershade since 1928 and that had been absorbed in 1991 into the Regional Coppershade Valley Credit Union and that still occupied the same red sandstone vault at the back of the same lobby. She wore her good coat and her good Oxford lace-ups, and she carried her driver's license and her birth certificate and her father's letter folded into her messenger bag. The manager was Lyle Pittman, age 60, who had been a senior loan officer at First National before the merger and who had been the manager of the credit union since 1998. Lyle had attended Tom's funeral in August of 2024. Lyle had bought peanut brittle at Margie's father's counter when he was 6 years old. Margie said, "Mr. Ed Pittman, I would like to access a safety deposit box that was opened in my name in 1972 by my father. Box 212. Howard Pinney set it up. Lyle Pittman, who had not in his life been asked such a question, set down his coffee cup. He looked at her very slowly. He said, "Mrs. Stannard, Howard Pinney died in 1989. He said, "Mrs. Stannard, our records on safety deposit boxes from before the 1991 merger are in the basement archive, and they are not always complete." He said, "Mrs. Stannard, let me go look." He was gone for 28 minutes. He came back with a thin manila folder in his hand and a look on his face that Margie had not seen on a banker's face since 1978, when she had walked into a Hopkins County bank for the first time to set up a checking account with her new husband. "Mrs. Stannard," Lyle Pittman said, "the box exists. The box has been continuously rented in your name since July 10, 1972. The rent was paid as a one-time 50-year lump sum by your father at setup, plus a 15-year extension paid by Howard Pinney's estate in 1989, plus a perpetual renewal codicil added by Howard's son Donald Pinney before he retired in 2007. The next rental fee is not due until 2042. No one has accessed the box since July 10, 1972. Would you like to see it now? Margie said. Yes. He walked her to the vault. He turned the heavy brass wheel of the vault door with the soft, slow grinding sound that vault doors make. The inside of the vault was a small cold room, lined floor to ceiling with brass-fronted deposit boxes. Box 212 was on the north wall, far right corner at chest height. Lyle Pittman fitted his master key into the master lock. He held out a single small brass key on a thin chain that Margie had not seen before, which had been kept in the bank's archive folder for 54 years. He said, "Mrs. Stannard, your father left the second key with us. Will you fit it?" Margie's hand was steady when she fit the small brass key into the second lock. She turned it. Both locks released together. Lyle Pittman drew the box out and carried it to the small oak privacy counter at the center of the vault room and set it down. He stepped back. He stepped out of the vault. He closed the vault door halfway behind him, the way a banker closes a door halfway when he wants to give a widow her privacy. Margie lifted the lid. Inside, on a faded green felt liner, lay the 4 items her father had named on page 5. Walt Whitlock's silver pocket watch, polished bright, ticking faintly. Margie picked it up and held it to her ear and heard the slow, steady working of a 1924 Elgin movement that had not been wound in 54 years and yet had somehow kept time the day someone had wound it, because Howard Pinney's son Donald had quietly opened the box in 2007 and wound the watch before relocking it, as a small kindness on his father's behalf. Although Margie would not learn this detail until a year later, when Donald wrote her a letter from his retirement home in Sarasota, a 6-point tin sheriff's deputy star, tarnished gray-brown. The engraving, Copper Shade, County 1898, cut shallow into the front. A cream-colored envelope sealed with a dab of red wax. She did not open this one in the vault. She knew what was inside, and a small framed black-and-white wedding portrait, 4 inches by 6 inches in a thin walnut frame. The young man in the photograph was unmistakably her father, tall and thin in a dark suit, 28 years old, with the same straight nose and the same set of the jaw she had inherited. Beside him sat a young woman in a knee-length cream wedding dress with dark hair and a quiet, shy face, holding a newborn infant wrapped in a christening blanket. On the white border of the photograph, in pencil in her father's hand, Walt, Vivian, and Helen, May 12, 1947, Cedar Rapids. Margie sat down on the small wooden stool in the vault room. She held the photograph in both hands. She did not cry. She studied her sister's tiny 3-day-old face. She looked for herself in it. She found her own father's chin. She said aloud, to the empty vault and to her father wherever he was and to the small infant, "Helen, hello." She closed the box. She placed all 4 items in her messenger bag, the watch wrapped in her handkerchief, the star in a clean envelope Lyle Pittman gave her, the cream cash envelope still sealed because she wanted to open it at her own kitchen table, and the wedding photograph cradled against her ribs inside the canvas. She thanked Lyle Pittman. She signed the access log. She walked out of the credit union into the March sunshine that had broken through the clouds since she had gone in. That afternoon, at her kitchen table, she opened the cream cash envelope. $2,400 in crisp 1972 $10 bills, the seal of the U.S. Treasury still as sharp as the day they had been printed. Slipped between 2 of the bills was a small folded note in her father's hand. For college or to start over, whichever comes first. I am proud of you no matter which. She did not weep over the cash. She set it aside. She wept, very quietly and for a long time, over the note. The hunt for Helen took 6 weeks. Margie was 71 years old, and she did not know the internet very well, So she walked back to the courthouse on Tuesday morning, the 10th of March, and she sat down across from Addie Cornish, and she said, "Addie, I need to find a person." Addie said, "Yes, ma'am." Margie said, "Her name is Helen Margaret Whitlock. She was born July 22, 1947 in Cedar Rapids, Iowa. She was raised by her uncle Henry Whitlock in Davenport. She would now be 78. She is my older sister, and I have never met her, and I have only just learned of her existence. And I do not know if she is still alive." Addie listened, with her face very still. When Margie was finished, Addie reached across her desk and laid her hand on top of Margie's hand and said, "Mrs. Stannard, I have a cousin in Davenport who works at the Scott County Clerk's office in. Let me call her this afternoon." 6 weeks of small, careful, slow searching followed. Henry Whitlock had died in Davenport in 1991. His son Carl had moved to Mason City in 1998. Carl had a daughter in Iowa City who had a phone. Helen Whitlock had married a man named Donald Pranton in 1969 and had become Helen Pranton. Helen Pranton had been widowed in 2011. Helen Pranton lived in a small senior apartment in Sioux City, Iowa, age 78, in good health, with a phone number Addie wrote on a scrap of paper in pencil in her round handwriting and slid across the desk to Margie on Wednesday afternoon, the 22nd of April. Margie carried the scrap of paper home in the inner pocket of her messenger bag for 3 days before she had the courage to dial it. She dialed on Saturday morning, the 25th of April, at 10 o'clock, sitting in the burgundy wingback chair in her parlor with the black 1962 rotary telephone on the small mahogany side table beside her, and the cream packet of her father's letter laid open on the doily for moral support. The phone rang 3 times. A woman's voice answered, soft and careful. "Hello, this is Helen Pranton," Margie said. "Mrs. Pranton, my name is Marjorie Stannard. I am 71 years old. I live in Coppershade, Iowa. I have something to tell you that may take you by surprise, and I have a letter from your father to read to you if you can sit a few minutes." There was silence on the line. Margie heard, in Sioux City, a kitchen clock ticking and a small dog snuffling against a screen door. Helen Pranton said, very softly, "You are Walt's other daughter." Margie said, "Yes, ma'am." Helen Pranton said, "I have been waiting for this phone call for 72 years. They talked for 2 hours and 40 minutes. Margie read the letter aloud. Helen Pranton cried in Sioux City and Margie cried in Coppershade. Helen confirmed that Henry had given her 1 letter a year from Walt every July 22nd from 1953 until Walt's death in 1972, that she had kept all of them in a small carved cedar box on her dresser, that she had wondered her whole life if her father had any other children, that she had not been able to find a way to ask the question without seeming to ask for an inheritance, that her husband Donald had urged her for 42 years to make the trip to Coppershade, and she had not had the courage, and that she had a son named Robert in Minneapolis, and a daughter named Eleanor, named after no one but the Queen of England, and that she would very much like to come to Coppershade as soon as her arthritis allowed. Helen drove the 4 hours down from Sioux City on Saturday, May 9th, with her daughter Eleanor at the wheel and a casserole of Iowa hot dish in the back seat and a small carved cedar box of her father's 71 annual letters on her lap. Margie met them at the curb in front of her apartment in her cream sweater and her navy barn coat and her shaking knees, and Helen Pranton, who looked very much like a softer, whiter, more weathered version of Margie's own mirror, stepped out of the car and walked directly into Margie's arms without a word, and held her for 1 full minute on the public sidewalk of Birch Street, while a postman across the way set down his bag and quietly took off his cap. They sat at Margie's kitchen table for the rest of that day. They read the 71 letters together. They looked at the wedding photograph in the walnut frame. They made plans. The plan they made was the 5 and dime. Helen said, "Margie, your father started that store the year I was born. I have never set foot in it. I would like to set foot in it before I die." Margie said, "Helen, I would like to set foot in it with you." Helen said, "And then I would like to help you open it again." Margie said, "As what?" Helen said, as ours. From the 9th of May through the 20th of June, Margie Stannard and her older sister Helen Pranton, with the help of Adelaide Cornish at the courthouse, Lyle Pittman at the credit union, Carl Whitlock the cousin in Mason City, Robert Pranton the nephew in Minneapolis, the Coppershade Methodist Building Committee, and 17 women of the Coppershade Garden Club, restored 412 Main Street, Coppershade, Iowa. They had the front windows cleared of plywood and reglazed with period-correct hand-blown plate glass. They had the gold leaf signage repainted on the brick fascia by a sign painter in Cedar Rapids who had learned the trade from his grandfather. The new sign read, Whitlock and Daughters 5 and Dime, in the same period script Walt had used in 1949. They had the pressed tin ceiling polished. They had the wide plank floors stripped and oiled. They had the original Whitlock's penny sorting tray restored at a small antique cabinet shop in Iowa City, the dovetailed corners re-glued, the green felt replaced with new identical forest green felt, the brass plaque polished. They filled the tray with 12 compartments of penny candy, Mary Jane's, Bit of Honey, Bazooka, root beer barrels, pink Necco wafers, strawberry hard candies, peppermint sticks, caramels, black licorice ropes, bubblegum cigars, squirrel nut zippers, saltwater taffy. They framed Walt's Tin Sheriff's Deputy Star, the one that had been their grandfather's badge from 1898 to 1924, in a small gilt frame on dark green velvet, and they hung it above the cash register at the front counter. They priced everything in the store at 1 cent or $1 in honor of the auction notice that had brought Margie back. Opening day was Sunday, the 21st of June, 2026, Father's Day. Patricia flew in from Florida the day before, in a state of indignation and disbelief and quiet contrition, and stayed at the apartment on Birch Street. The 3 Whitlock sisters, ages 75 and 78 and 71, woke at 6 on the morning of opening day and dressed together in Margie's small bedroom and walked down Main Street arm in arm at 8:30, in cream sweaters and dusty rose cardigans and long white aprons newly sewn by Helen's granddaughter, with Walt's pocket watch on a fob in Margie's apron pocket, ticking the time Walt had set in 1924. Margie unlocked the front door at 8:59. She turned the cardboard sign in the window from closed to open. The little brass bell over the door rang for the first time on her watch, when Adelaide Cornish walked through it at 9 sharp with her 3 children, the eldest carrying a hand-lettered cardboard sign that read, Welcome Home Whitlock Girls. By 10 o'clock, 60 people had come through the door. By 11 o'clock, 90. By noon, the entire town of Coppershade had walked the warm Main Street block in their Sunday clothes to stand at the long maple counter and buy a penny candy from the restored wooden tray and shake the hand of one of the 3 Whitlock sisters and listen to Margie tell the small piece of the story she had decided to tell, which was that her father had loved his store, that his father had loved it before him, that the store had been waiting 54 years for one of his daughters to come back, and the 2 of his daughters had come back at the same time. The 4th daughter, who never came back, Patricia, stood quietly behind the counter in a dusty rose cardigan and rang up penny candy at the brass cash register with the bell, and did not say much, but kept a hand on the small of Margie's back all afternoon. And Margie took this as the apology Patricia had not yet known how to say. At 3 in the afternoon, with the shop full and the sun pouring through the freshly cleaned plate glass windows and the bell of the cash register ringing, and the smell of the kerosene oil in the maple counter coming up warm under their 3 sets of palms, Margie Stannard, who had been alone in a 1-bedroom apartment on Birch Street eating canned soup on Valentine's Day, lifted her father's pocket watch from her apron pocket and clicked it open and held it up to her sister Helen's ear. It said 3:07. It was still keeping time. Margie kissed the small Coppershade County 1898 tin star in its gilt frame above the cash register, and she whispered to her father, 2 states and 1 heaven away, the only word she had left that meant everything she needed it to mean. Found.